Today we're going to talk about portfolios and the sort of slow move that we've been doing as a program towards portfolios. I gave you all agendas, so you should have a basic breakdown of what we're up to today. Largely we're going to spend our time talking about what portfolios are being used for already in the program, how we're moving the rest of the program in that direction, what the point is, how they will both benefit our students and benefit you as faculty members. And then we'll do some norming just to get a sense of what it is that we're talking about and how we can use these portfolios in our classroom in beneficial ways for everybody. Before we get started, and we're going to start with Cindy doing her song and dance about stretch, but before we do that, a week ago today, Cindy sent out this email, student survey and faculty survey of DSP and English 1A. There is in there, down here, a faculty survey link that we are trying to get everybody who's teaching 1A or 1AFS to do so that we can get some useful feedback on the program for preparing for next semester. So Cindy asked me to give you a few minutes to do it now, to click on it and do it now. So if you could do that either on your laptop. English 1A or English 1AFS, right? Not 1B and not 2.
So Ryan asked me to speak a little bit today about what we do in Stretch, and I like to think of it as assessment by instructors for instruction, rather than just being deciding whether your program is successful because you know that students have gotten certain grades. Grade distribution is one way to think about it. Tracking them in other courses by their grades in those courses is another way to do it. GPAs is another way to do it, but now that is quantitative and it doesn't help us understand why students are successful or how we can help them be more successful in our classes. So what we've done in Stretch this year, if you've taught in Stretch before, but before this year, this is going to seem new to you, we've taken the whole process online. So Kelly, you will be happy I just heard you mention killing trees. We have decided not to do that quite so much. So we have a shared Canvas site that hosts all sections just for the ePortfolio assignment. So Jennifer Red creates one course called the Stretch Reflection in ePortfolio course, and it downloads all of our students and all of the instructors into single course just for this assignment. Then I can post the assignment, the scoring guides, the survey of consent for students once they turn in a portfolio. Do you want to consent to make it part of the student archive? All of that can happen in one site. So students upload an ePortfolio URL to their Canvas assignment from this. They complete a consent form, joining or not joining the archive. Instructors then read in teams of 3 to provide each portfolio 2 readings, and that means, yes, there's some round-robin discussion among 3 instructors at the end. The cohort norms today, we just did that earlier this morning today, and instructors grade through finals week. So that's our process, basically. In our ePortfolio, what is an ePortfolio? You've seen these if you looked at the DSP portfolios from last summer. In Canvas, there's a feature. You can go in your account, and you may have made one yourself. You create an ePortfolio. Into the ePortfolio for Stretch, currently, there is a self-reflection essay, an appendix of evidence, the sample essays, and in this case, we happen to have in the DSP portfolios, we happen to have a critical essay, and the critical essay happens to be the final assignment in our Stretch sequence because we all teach the same sequence of assignments. So just conveniently this year, we had this sort of nice coming together of the critical essay and the critical essay, which probably will go forward for us. And then the students will also upload their pre-writing for self-reflection, which they might not always do, but since this year, one of the GELOs that they were assessing on is whether or not they have a process, then we thought that it would be appropriate to include that bit of information. Yes, Ed?
What is the appendix of evidence?
I am about to show you. Oh, very good. So what is it that faculty actually read? You'll notice that there were a lot of documents in there, and it would take a long time to read a portfolio if you read every document that's in there, but you don't. What you read is the appendix of evidence, gives you an overview of the portfolio, and then there's a self-reflection essay. That is as far as I ask instructors to read. You can go in and read more documents if you like, if you want to follow up, if you have a question, if you're having a hard time deciding, but you don't have to. This is an appendix of evidence. It looks a little like a table of contents. It is. It's an annotated table of contents. The annotations explain what each sample or supporting document is doing to make the case about student development in the portfolio.
Could you read the headings for us?
No, but I'll send you the PowerPoint and you can upload this because that is so small right now that I can't read it. Okay? So what I will tell you is that one of them says, this top part is the sample essays, and it's telling me something about this first sample and the second sample. And this says supporting documents, and it's numbering and naming each one of the documents. And so it's one of the things that the students are learning to do in this kind of portfolio writing is they're learning to have a body of evidence that is so complex that your primary reader can't read it all. And you have to find ways to epitomize that, right? To summarize it and make it presentable and readable, which is a very real world problem for presenting evidence, right? And their self-reflection essay does exactly what you just had your students do, right? We all assigned, cross-stretch and English 1A, we all assigned the same assignment. Discuss an early piece of writing and a late piece of writing and show us how you have made progress in both process and audience, the rhetorical features of the text, audience, purpose, context. So that's what an appendix of evidence is. What we're doing with the self-reflection essay, the reason I really have grown to love this assignment is that it is an authentic writing moment for the student and for the faculty readers who share that moment with the writer. In other words, you are judging, when you look at this portfolio, you are judging, especially the way we've written, we all share one assignment sheet and we make sure that the assignment is written so that it emphasizes the fact that this is a real moment of writing. You are addressing a real audience that is a faculty reader. One faculty reader knows you really well, knows all your work, and the other faculty reader is going to have to get to know you, right? They all share the same CLOs, they all share the same GELOs, which define the values for our community, right? And you'll need to address those. They address a real occasion. This is the end of a period of instruction, right? At this moment in time, how can you help these two faculty readers try to assess your work? And it responds to a real question. What have you learned? A really direct, really specific, but very real question. And it asks them to speak with a real purpose. It asks them to write a compelling argument about their development as a writer. And therefore, it can be judged in those terms, right? An authentic writing, piece of reflection writing, when you compose the assignment in these terms, is asking for a reflection writing that speaks directly to a reader evaluator. And what you can ask yourself as an evaluator is, did the student use the portfolio process to do the job he or she was tasked to do for these faculty readers in this particular moment, right? So it is an assignment that almost, I mean, the scoring guide almost writes itself, and I will read you some of these. So what we're looking at is how the student has met the demands of this particular writing moment. How has the student addressed this rhetorical situation, right? And we're looking at what we're doing up here is that we're mapping the student's rhetorical performance to the values that we have as a program, that we have decided on as a program as Stretch faculty. What we know is we want the readers to be able to do things in a text, not just to do them, but because doing these things in a text actually helps the writer make contact with the reader in very specific ways. This mirrors the kind of instruction that we're doing. This mirrors the way we're setting up assignments. these are the values that the stretch curriculum is specifically geared to produce for our students, right? To engage them in these particular kinds of things. So does the writer understand the reader's job? Right? And under that, arguments are addressed to the reader's question. The reader has asked you a question. Can you answer it? Right? Analysis is both focused and purposeful in the context of that question and in the context of this moment. And the conclusion helps the reader to actually do the evaluation that the reader needs to do. Right? These are the kinds of things that we've come up with and that we seem to get when we sat here this morning after 3 years of doing this. Some of us are new to the process, but there are a couple of people who've been around for the whole 3 years. We really have gotten to the point where our discussions are less about discrepancies and more about, let's talk about, you know, whether this student is really hitting the marks we want the student to be able to hit, right? And we can be having really sincere conversations about what's going on in our classrooms and how that is or is not being reflected in the writing that we're seeing. So it becomes a very, very useful discussion for us as instructors. As a WPA, one of the things it helps us to, Ryan and Richard and I, it helps us also to kind of have a moment where we can see a group of faculty come together and have these discussions about value, and that helps us to keep the program moving forward as well. So if the scoring guide does do a good job of articulating the program values in the moment that the faculty have defined by this one assignment, the question on the scoring guide becomes how do we map those values, and then the discrepancies are discussions of real discrepancies. And so what you'll notice is that in my, oh, and I don't have a copy of it, but did I give you a copy? Yes. So in this particular handout right here, this is my little note to them this year. Right? And you'll see that one of the things I'm asking them to do is give me a little reader report. I've asked for these before and they've come in kind of tricklingly, and now I actually need them, right? I mean, I really need you guys to just write to me about when you get together to discuss the portfolios that you haven't agreed on. When you get together for that, what's at issue here? Because that's something we probably need to take up together going down the road, right? We need to all be able to come together and come to consensus about these kinds of things. So this becomes a real moment for us as a program to make sure that we're tapped into the same sets of values and that we are maybe not always seeing things in exactly the same way, but we understand that we're all grounded in the same place. And it's a very, I think, congenial, sorry, I look at Jada just when she's yawning. She's not bored with me. Even though she's like seen me since 9 o'clock this morning, that's not the problem, I'm sure. But yes, so we become this little group, and it's quite nice. The other thing about us is that we are also, first year writing is the first point of contact with students. From the reflection of writing to this very first step that students take into writing at San Jose State, this is us. This is first year writing. This too can be first year writing, although you know there are other departments that also offer the A3 course, right? But then you go into the 100W, and now it's much more writing across the curriculum. But this is slowly building out to being more of a university-wide writing program. And people on this campus are very conscious of now trying to create points of contact there. So we are now getting to the point with portfolios where we're going to be able to map our developments along these first 2 rows. How much other people in the university come along and start to join us, that depends. That's the work of the Writing Requirements Committee. And I'm hoping that at some point, what we end up with is a series of portfolios that constantly ask the student and the instructors to turn back on themselves and say, where have we gotten to with this milestone? You know, where have we gotten to now? Where do we go next? And then I think what we'll have is we'll have a real strong sense, if we can get that conversation going, what we'd have is a really strong sense of how students progress, how our students at this university progress through the writing curriculum that we've given them. And what can we expect from them? What are the thresholds of value at each point? Right? Can we come to some kind of consensus about that? We're building a pretty strong, theoretically, We're building a pretty strong assessment program because it combines both direct and indirect measures of student progress. It allows quantitative data to be supported by and to be explained by the qualitative data that we collect through the readings and through the students' own essays. And it provides the kind of feedback loop for continued program development that is usually recommended. So that, yeah.
Could you tell us the abbreviations just to make sure?
GSP is Directed Self-Placement ePortfolio. First Year Writing, that's us, right? Or F, comma, YW, exclamation mark. And WID is Writing in the Discipline. So that is our little plan, putting the kick in writing assessment. And I will take any questions that you have. Oh, yeah, oh, okay.
No,
I'm just kidding.
very quickly, no, it's just
Yeah.
a very quick question, I had it. It says what are 1A and 2 are moving toward and why. What about 1B?
1B as well.
Okay.
What we really want to get is everybody involved. And just let me say one other thing, actually, now that I think about it. When I mentioned that archive of student writing, that is going to be pretty cool. I'm working with the library right now. They are totally jazzed about it. We now sit on this data set on student writing that is, we have 411 consented portfolios from directed self-placement last summer out of around 2,800, right? That's students who have given us consent to put their writing in an archive, right? I do that with the stretch portfolios too. They get a chance to say, yes, I want to be in that archive. That archive is available to anyone who wants to study writing on this campus and beyond it, right? So we have an interesting population on this campus when it comes to writing development at the college level. So if you want to go in with your students and study student writing, there will be things you can access. If the LLD TESOL program wants to go in and start looking at things, if researchers in the Department of Ed or linguistics or in our department want to start actually doing hands-on studies of the corpus that we're developing, they'll be able to do that. So it's going to be a pretty cool thing for students to belong to. And your students will have the same opportunity to join that next year. We didn't get that set up for this year, but once you're in that electronic mode, it's really easy to pull them in.
Is this still a question?
Yeah, you can ask a question, sure.
Here's how to phrase this. I get that Stretch is a pilot project, and so it's tightly controlled and it's uniform, and the grading is uniform and so on. Do you see that becoming the norm for 1B and 2 as well, where we all have the same syllabus and the same assignments and the same everything?
We've never discussed that.
I will be answering that.
Okay. Just curious. Like franchise model.
You're talking about the entire curriculum for the course.
Yeah. I can wait.
So we are no longer a pilot, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
We're out of pilot
I
mode.
didn't mean that in a derogatory way.
No, I just needed you to know we're not a pilot anymore. We're in full implementation. Yeah, there's no more remediation on campus. So this is it. This is who we are. Yep. By the way, Chancellor just told the entire CSU that that's the direction you have to go in, by the way. If we weren't there right now, we'd be getting there real fast and we'd be playing catch up. So, yeah. And I just got a thing in my mail. I don't want to start any rumors, but they're talking about getting rid of the EPT. So I'm just saying, it's pretty fabulous, okay? Good things are happening. Okay, thank you, people.
One of the reasons that I asked Cindy to come in here and talk, well, two reasons that I asked Cindy to come in here and talk about their portfolios is that she has done a tremendous amount along with the other stretch instructors to sort of make it a robust activity, something that everybody can sort of understand and get involved in. She's also a very positive and optimistic person. I am much more pessimistic and much, much more likely to look at things in terms of problems. And so I want to give you just a brief explanation of why we're moving towards portfolios from the pessimistic point of view. We have a series of problems that we have been dealing with in the writing program. And I have heard many of them from you, I have heard many of them from students, and I have heard many of them from administrators above us. Right? Administrators above us would like us to be able to collect data that helps them to understand that we are achieving our purposes. We have, this year, we've taught close to 6,000 students in first-year writing classes, maybe more than that. Next year, just in the fall, we're looking at an enrollment of closer to 5,000 students, plus however many more in the spring. And what our administrators at the dean's levels and the provost levels and the assessment VAPs and the you name it, what they want to be able to say is this program makes some sort of coherent sense. And we have been working really hard to think about how to do that. Number two, from the instructor's point of view, we have a number of concerns having to do with things like, I don't know what anybody else in any of the other sections teach. I've never had a chance to go see people teach. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what other people, if what I am teaching is related to what other people are teaching, and if I'm doing a good job. Number three, I have lots of work, and I need to figure out ways to be efficient about my work that will also be pedagogically sound. And number four, how do I get some sense of support and guidance and community out of a program that is not already just large, but growing larger? From a student's point of view, and I hear this from students all the time, is, okay, I've taken this class, what does it have to do with anything? Right? Why do I have to take this? I took AP English in high school. Why do I have to take this? It was a terrible class. I don't want to do it. I don't feel like I'm learning anything. Now, if you've heard that complaint, that probably means that you work with students, right? So what we have is, at several different levels, we have a series of problems that we're trying to figure out ways to address in ways that are meaningful, pedagogically sound, and will solve all of our problems. So that's what the portfolio is intended to do. It's intended to give us a way to address all of those different sorts of problems in ways that will actually make your jobs and your lives easier, and will also allow us to meet all the other charges and goals and needs that we have. Now, I understand that asking for a movement from one place to another place across the board is often a recipe for disaster. I told you I am a pessimist, right? I understand that. But what we're trying to do is move slowly, and so you will notice in the 2 years that I've been here, we have gone from, actually right before I got here, we had a test that all the students took, right? And we have slowly moved towards writing assignments that address our GELOs and that students can do in a variety of different ways, that can be imported into your classroom in ways that don't disrupt your whole flow, and that have already moved us significantly towards this portfolio model. And so what this meeting is and what next year will be is another step in that direction. The goal eventually, so this is to answer your question, Julie, the goal eventually is to make this an assignment that is universal across the writing programs. Everybody will have students do a portfolio at the end of the semester in which they collect a certain number of documents and a certain number of things, and they reflect critically and self-reflectively on those things, and we all have a chance to read different people's, right?
Yeah,
Well, and so that does not mean, that is intended to be instead of I write a syllabus and you all teach my syllabus. I don't want that any more than you do.
I don't know, that's what I did as a TA.
You're a better teacher than you were as a TA, I hope.
It's like, not a shifting goalpost, except, well, that too, but it's not just, the idea of what is good practices is continually changing. And so it's hard to keep adapting to what are now considered best practices. Sometimes I just want to say, just tell them to do it. Just get it, not do it.
Well, unfortunately, I will tell you the same things I tell my students, and that It depends, it changes.
Well, it's a continual search for excellence, and that's a good thing.
And what we do have, so here's part of the thing about the portfolio, is what we do have. One of the things that we share across our sections and across our all of our situations is we have this set of GE learning outcomes that we all design our syllabus around, that we all teach to students to work towards, that our administrators like, that our administrators like, that our teachers like. So we do have a goalpost that we all share that isn't regularly shifting, although apparently it has shifted relatively recently, right? But those GELOs are essentially grounded in 40 years worth of research in writing studies that says what we should ask students to do is think about and make meaningful decisions about different kinds of writing for different audiences, for different purposes. That's what our GELOs are, right? So in our assessment, one that will serve both in your classes and at the programmatic level, that's the sort of through line, that's the common thread that allows us to sort of focus on one assignment that will do all these, but will still allow you to have really interesting, different, unique assignments within your own classroom that aren't all, like you don't have to teach Daniel's class and Daniel doesn't have to teach Boris's class. You can teach the class that you need to teach to meet those assignments. This is the sort of way of showing a bit of programmatic coherence.
I just want to point out that Jada doesn't have to teach Daniel's syllabus, and I don't have to teach Jada's syllabus either in Stretch. Right. Just to point that out.
Okay, yeah, I don't know much about Stretch.
Yeah, I know. That's obvious. So, yeah,
Even
it's
with
not all the
prompts,
way.
I mean, like, we take the gist of the skeleton, like, prompt or whatever, like, the syllabus, but like, I make it sound like me, right, and like what I'm doing in the class, because I'm reading through the class, and stuff like that, but
I hope the reading is.
no, everybody has different readings, I mean, unless you want it.
So they work in cohorts around sort of shared themes, and they still all have separate syllabi. Why read it when you have us here to tell you all about the exciting things that are happening?
4 classes, 3 preps. I don't understand.
We're pitchmen, don't you know that? That's why we were hired, is to sell you things that you don't want.
In the portfolio, I understand the self-reflection essay. Do all of their, it doesn't look like everything they've written for the class needs to be included in the portfolio. Do we just choose which particular assignments best represent, or how does,
They
what else is
choose.
included?
You are going, so later on I was going to talk about it, but I'll tell you now. There will be, just the same as the Stretch, there will be 4 elements for the 1A, 1B, and 2 portfolios. The first one will be the self-reflection essay. Approximately 500 to 600 words, so about 2 pages, double-spaced. This will all come out in email too, so you can ignore it later. So about 500 to 600 words self-reflection in which they make the argument to a very specific audience. They are arguing to teachers in the writing program. The purpose is to make the argument that they have developed an awareness of and strategies for working towards what they consider effective writing. Right? So it doesn't say, do the best job that's ever been done, be Ernest Hemingway at the end of your first year class. It says, do you understand what we're asking you to do, and have you started to move in the direction of those things? Right? So the first one is the self-reflection. The second one is the appendix of evidence. Similar to Cindy's, it will be an annotated appendix, much like a table of contents, in which students choose everything. You choose nothing. You have already assigned them. You have already graded those assignments elsewhere. You have read them. You don't have to read them again. They are asked to choose what is the evidence that you have produced in this class that will help you to prove that you have met the outcomes of this course.
Do they cite that evidence in their paper?
They can, depending on their purposes and goals. Because they have to argue to other people in the program that they have achieved the outcomes, right? So if their argument is built on finely detailed explications and citations of work, that's fine.
I don't necessarily mean it parenthetically, but I mean mentioned in my, I mean these specific examples.
Right.
And sometimes they naturally do.
Yeah.
Is this for the second reader, when we read in pairs?
I'm not sure I understand. Well, it will all be together, grouped together in the portfolio. So you as a teacher may read it from your students, may refer back to it at some point. You as a reader of somebody else's may refer to it. You are not at all expected or required to. The goal of that thing is an intellectual challenge for students. How do you make sense of and derive evidence from a series of writing exercises that you have achieved?
Can I just add one thing? One of the things about it, Ed, is that it becomes, most of us now read the appendix first as a kind of overview, and it really expedites your reading of the essay. And you can get the reading down to, it's fast, makes it fast.
Can I ask about that appendix? Are they writing a, what they learned from that assignment, in those 2 lines under it?
What it represents.
What
It represents in their argument.
Okay.
So, I can send you some.
Can you give me one example, please?
Yeah, okay, so their first essay,
Okay.
their early essay, the DSP essay, they might say something like, this is the first essay I wrote even before I came to college, and you can see that I had almost no sense of audience, even though I was given one. I never directly addressed my audience even once. And I wrote it all at once. I didn't sit down and parse out my ideas, and you can see that. Right, so it just makes a statement about why this piece of evidence is there and what it's demonstrating. It is an intellectual step that they make toward being able to write that essay. It's part of their pre-writing.
Or they might use like a shorter thing, like it is a supporting document, right? Like in my class, we do a lot of pre-writes or whatever, so they might say pre-write, one of the supporting documents and pre-write for critical essay or something like that, and then they might say, like pre-writes really helped me to put my ideas on paper because I didn't have any restrictions or something like that, like it helped me as well. Whatever. Good.
Now, another thing to sort of keep in mind about those is that these portfolios are not the same as portfolios they would produce in like their art classes, for example. So it's not a selection of the best work you've done, right? It's a demonstration of an intellectual learning arc. And that is probably as hard for students to get their heads around as it is for us to get our heads around. Like the impulse is to want to pick the best stuff and show that you're the best. And really the goal is to pick the stuff that will help to demonstrate your point, which is not always the same thing.
So probably, and this may go without saying, then they don't have to revise revisions for the portfolio. They're simply choosing that work to support it.
They've already done all that work, so they don't have to revisit. They can, if they're so inclined, they can. And you may even encourage them to do so in the preparation of the appendix, but there's no need for them to do that.
This is their final.
This is it. This is their final.
And so at the end of the semester, are we evaluating product or process?
I'm not sure I understand. You mean in your class or for these portfolios? Well, you will have some guidelines for those. You are attempting to assess both, right? So are they meeting the challenge that they have said that they are going to meet? Are they showing that they have achieved these certain things?
One of the things that we were talking about this morning is that it allows us to really see that students can often articulate the lessons that they've learned before they can actually execute them effectively in the product. And so it really allows students, Linda or Leanne, they don't have to revise their essays, but they have to be able to look at an essay and say, this isn't perfect. And I can see, they'll say that about their last essay. This is the best essay I've got, and you can see I still have a place to go because, I still have these problems. And that's where I want a student. I have gotten to the point now where I care a lot less about the product and a lot more about the learning process because of this whole, and I have them do reflection writing all the way through.
Sarah?
As a program, are we adopting a uniform percentage of the grade that the portfolio is worth? Yeah. So we get to determine that.
Yes, because it's serving the two different purposes, right? One purpose, Stretch may be a different model, but for us, in the larger writing program, This is intended to be an assignment that you incorporate into your classes, and how you make decisions about how you incorporate it to serve your teaching and pedagogical goals are different than the assessment goals at the programmatic level. So I'm not interested in setting a programmatic requirement in order to somehow solve your teaching goals. Does that make sense? So, Boris.
Okay, so if it's 2 readers, does the portfolio get 2 grades from the professors, and you average that out, and the student receives a final grade that way from that? No.
No. The grades on the assignment come from the teacher.
Only, okay.
The programmatic level assessment will get 2 different grades, and there may be discussions about what is and what isn't passing. But those are not, the programmatic assessment should not inform the grade in the class, because they're serving different goals.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, like right now, to answer your question, it's, like I have 4 sections of strategy. I have a partner for the portfolio, and he has 4 sections of strategy. So in that combined Canvas course that we have for the program, like I put a grade for 1 student, and she puts a grade for 1 student. But we still have our own Canvas course, like we can do like whatever. Like, but for that program assessment, like we have 2 grades, and then Cindy can do it. But we just like put them in there. But then, like when we're reading our students, obviously, at least I would not know my student, right? Like how I know them for the whole year and how they progressed or whatever. So my grade is like for the portfolio, even for the class itself, is like based on myself. Like, yeah.
Thank you.
One of the things we discussed when we were norming, I was doing my students as the samples today, and I do check my grade with them. You know, like we'll give it a score. So this is like a 1.9. So I'm thinking C minus, and I'll run that by everybody, and they're like, yeah, because I want to know how my grades are sitting within the group. But that's me having a discussion with my fellow reader. That's not something that you're doing for the program.
Can the portfolio substitute for the final exam?
Yes. Yes, and in fact, one of the reasons that we are moving it to one of the reasons that Stretch has, and one of the reasons that we are moving it towards Canvas and on into the digital mode is so that we can push back when we collect these things. So you will all have turned into me a bunch of paper packets. I will not describe in gross detail what happens to those packets, but essentially I spend hours on end pulling things out of them and swapping them and then charting them and putting them back in your boxes so that you can read them, and I can do the same thing on the other end. That seems like a tremendous waste of time and energy for all of us, but especially for me, but for all of us. But if we can do it on Canvas, we can push it back later so students can do it in the final, because everything will happen digitally, and so you're not location bound to pick up packets in the office. You're not required to turn them in early enough for me to spend paper cuts in my office. And so this will actually allow us to streamline. Essentially, it's the same process we've been doing, right? Essentially, it's the same. You'll get a stack of papers. You'll say, yes, meets matches up to whatever the standards are, whatever the expectations are, which will be spelled out in more detail later. And then you'll do it all on Canvas, so you can do it at home in your pajamas.
You said this will be done during the final.
It can be. It does not need to be.
You mean students can do it during the final time that we need?
But they could turn it in at that time. Yeah, I mean, we would encourage and expect that people would do this as a final assignment that they draft over time and get feedback on. To this point, we have been saying, because we need them earlier than the end of the semester, they could do it as in-class writing, or they could do drafts, or they could do whatever. But this will allow us to push it back so that you could collect it as a final assignment and use it as a revised, edited draft.
I think, though, we might want to caution not to do it as a final exam, like on your final exam day, because like some final exam days are March, or May 24th or something like that here, and that would just be horrendous if you had to, yeah.
Well, we wouldn't take our exam day, would we? If they turn in the portfolio, we wouldn't have to keep the exam date if we had the department's permission.
We're required to meet, but you can just meet and have a party.
Well, but I mean, if we have the department's
I was
permission, we
wondering
don't
about
have
that
to
required
meet.
to meet thing.
It's not the department that gives the permission, it's the college, so you'd need we would need a programmatic waiver from the college to not hold our final exam period. So, but you could collect it during your final exam. I would say it's probably not to your best benefit to have them sit there and write it on the last day.
So it's not a substitute?
Well, it's a substitute for the final assignment. Whether that, if you have a final exam, then probably not.
But I mean, but it
My-
seems like we should still have a final exam.
My understanding is that you have to have a culminating experience. This is your culminating experience.
So we don't have to have a
But
final
there's
exam.
but there's also an edict that you
No,
have to meet
actually,
on
that has been revised. I don't-
Has it?
It's been revised.
Oh,
What's been revised? We don't have to meet on a...
You have to be available for your student, and you have to have some kind of culminating activity. Being available for your students does not mean sitting at home during the final exam time,
So we have to show up for the final exam.
being in your office.
So essentially the portfolio will have two essays, an earlier one and a later one, or the same essay revised.
An earlier one and a later one. Again, remember what Brian said. The job is not for them to show that they can perfect an essay. It's to make an argument about the arc of development over a semester, right?
Will this, will we still need to do assessment that's similar to this, like what we did this semester?
This is going to swap out.
Okay, that was my, this.
So it will essentially swap out, right?
Excellent.
And the goal is, whether or not we'll be able to do this immediately or not, but the goal is that when you turn in your 22 students or 23 students on Canvas, then a small selection will be randomly taken from those and exchanged in the same way that our assignments are now, right? So I won't, the goal is to not me give you anybody else your entire class, right? But you'll get 10 of Kelly's, Kelly will get 10 of Cherie's, so that we have a small randomly chosen sample for the programmatic level, right? I don't want to pile 200 additional essays on anybody's plate, right? And that doesn't necessarily serve any of the purposes that we're trying to serve. So how quickly that will happen is perhaps a little up in the air, but hopefully it will happen in the next 6 months, so that when you get them in December, it won't be this huge additional new burden on you. It'll be essentially the same burden that you've had this semester.
And that's where Stretch is moving in that direction. He's moving some ways in this direction, but I'm moving in that direction.
So that's part of the reduce the amount of labor that people are being required to do. So you're already being asked to do the labor. We're trying to make it a little more efficient and a little more streamlined, so that it's not quite so burdensome for everybody. More questions?
What are the other two elements?
Good question. So the first two are the self-reflection and the appendix of evidence. We will have the critical essay from the directed self-placement. Starting last year, every incoming student had a directed self-placement exercise, with the exception of a very small group of people. This year again, the vast majority of our students who take 1A classes, 1B classes, and 2 classes will have some access to a DSP that they have done in the last year or two. So the critical essay from the DSP will be the third element.
Verbatim or revised?
Verbatim. We are not asking for any revision on the elements that you include in this whatsoever.
And that is so we can see the process?
That is for so they can see the process. Right? Your job, again, is not to read all these things. The point is for them to be able to see the arc of their development. So we're sending them back to a thing that they did previously and asking them to think about how that is different.
And they'll always be able to access that throughout.
As long as they're enrolled here, they'll be able to access that.
So one of the beauties of this assignment, when I said that it's a real assignment, instructors came to me and said, well, I have a student, I don't know how it happened, but they didn't do the DSP assignment. And I'm like, that's very real. That student has to account for that. I did not start with the DSP essay for this self-reflection because I don't have one, because I screwed up and didn't do it. And now I can start with this essay as my starting point and move on, right? Or, as Richard just pointed out, I transferred in and I didn't do DSP, but I can start here. So it's just, it's a real, the beauty of asking someone a real question is that all they have to do is account for reality, right? I mean, DSP is not there, great.
So it puts
Where
the
would you
burden
begin?
on them, not us.
Well, it's not a burden either, it's a reality. I mean,
It's
this
an
is a reality. I
intellectual
made this choice, or I transferred in, or whatever
Yeah.
it is, and I can find a beginning point
Okay.
that I can describe to you and evidence for you, but it won't be my DSP essay. When they do have a DSP, that's a DSP essay.
Okay.
And again, the goal is not to add things for you to be able to check off a box and say, oh, okay, they didn't have this, and did they have that? The goal is to give them an intellectual challenge that they have to figure out how to address. And what they are coming to you for is, I've hit a bump in the road, how do I get around it? And so your job as the teacher is to be able to say, well, you don't have a DSP essay, so what are some ways that we can think about addressing this challenge? Maybe you start at a different place. Maybe you reflect on the fact that you tested out of the DSP, if that's a thing that you can even do.
Well, yeah,
Or-
because if you come in with A2 credit, he's talking about like in English 1B and English 2,
Right.
they won't have the DSP essay to pull back.
So there are any number of ways that it might come up. But your job is not to say, well, you don't have it, you can't pass. That's not a complete, right? That's not what we want from you, and that's not, I don't think, what you guys want either. Right. I'll just say the last element, one more. I've been trying to get through this list of elements. So the final element is one of the major assignments from the course. It can be any major assignment that they choose. I would encourage it to be the final assignment, but it can be any one that they choose as long as it's one of the major assignments. It can be multimodal or written or fully digital or whatever they choose. They're using it again as a beginning point as the DSP critical essay and a distant part of the arc. So if they have a shorter arc than somebody else, great. If they have a longer arc than somebody else, great. If they have a digital multimodal arc, or if they have a 8-page double-space essay arc, so be it. That will be their choice to make. But that will allow them to establish a beginning and an end date because their reflection is explaining this arc.
Presumably, this applies to the word, these can apply to the word count. On average, how big of a chunk do they take out of the word counts?
The word counts, as far as I'm aware, no longer exist, or do they?
They exist.
We all assign more than those, so I'm not concerned.
That's the perfect answer, Wilson.
Yes. I would say when I teach it, so in my class this semester, I had a final portfolio reflection. On the assignment sheet, it said the final draft can be no more than 500 to 600 words, but the total word count for that assignment is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 words because of how many different drafts and assignments they're doing. So if you just want to teach, what is that, 6 reflection essays over the course of your 1A semester, you could do that. You actually could do that. You actually could do that. It would be a fun class. All right, other questions?
Do we still do the diagnostic? Does everybody do it at the beginning of 1A and 1B?
I used to DSP.
I used to DSP.
I use that.
They have access to the DSP. You can. They have, so she's asking, how do you access the DSP? Your students have to post. Your students build a portfolio. So I can even show you here. Let me just, I wanted to show you briefly anyway, so we can do it here. All right, so in Canvas, and every student has access to this, as do you. Over here in your account, ePortfolios is the last link. And you can make up an endless number of portfolios for an endless number of reasons. There are a variety of ways to put them together. But essentially when you do, so we'll say workshop portfolio. Do not make it public. We do not want them public for two reasons. Number one, we don't necessarily want students showcasing these things, or at least we don't want to require them to showcase them. And number two, you'll see right here this huge, ugly, disgusting web link. This is the direct link to their portfolio. So when they make a DSP portfolio in the summer, they get this link and they copy and paste it into their DSP. So they can send this link anywhere and everywhere. We can get access to them in a variety of different ways. And that's how they get to their DSP, and they can send you that and you can access whatever's in there.
Send it to me in order for me to access.
Right, I think so.
In the directed self-placement, the reflection on college writing, they are told from the very first page that they are writing assignments that will be in a portfolio that will go to their first year writing instructor.
Through Canvas.
Through Canvas, yes. So that's their audience. Their audience is you and the 5,000 freshmen they come in with this year.
But I would only have access and those 5,000 other.
No, you will email your roster maybe a week before class or something and say, can you send me your DSP portfolio links?
Yeah, there it is. Thank you.
So they'll send you these and then you can link on them. And then once they build this final portfolio, this will generate a new one that's different from their DSP one, and that's the thing that you'll eventually turn into us.
And actually, Leanne, what I would recommend that you do is rather than have them send them to you by email, is create a Canvas assignment, have them, or even what I did, is I had them send them to me in an assignment, but then I also created a discussion thread for their literacy narrative in there, and that was our getting started exercise. So in the discussion thread, they had to read at least one other student's literacy narrative from the class.
And this is for 1A, primarily, or stretch, I mean.
It's the same course, remember?
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. All right, got it.
All incoming freshmen are doing the DSP with very, very few exceptions.
But it,
Well, but they would, no, so there will be very few students who will skip 1A. So once they're in 1B, the vast majority of them will have done this already at some point anyway.
But you still want a portfolio for, e-portfolio for 1B.
Yes.
It just wouldn't have the DSP.
Right, and as Cindy said, that they'll account for that.
No, it's still
Many of them
could.
will have the
Right.
DSP.
right.
They
So
still
they'll
will.
just repeat the,
In the fall, you will have some students who have, remember, they've gone through stretch, and they're going to their second semester of writing in their second year. So some of them will. Some of them won't, and they will just account for it.
They'll just account for it.
They'll just say, you know, I came in to 1B, even though I'm a first-time freshman, I came into 1B because I had AP credits. Or I came into 1B because I transferred credits from a junior college.
so the DSP is still a part of the e-portfolio in 1B.
Yes. And so if they have done in 1A, they have done added their DSP critical essay and added a final assignment and written about the ARC. And then they go into 1B the next semester, and at the end of 1B, we ask them to reset those points, right? Actually, they keep the same first point. They keep the DSP, and they reset a longer arc. And they say, you know what? I've taken 2 writing classes and I've learned twice as much stuff. Can you believe it? And it's all based on the same set of goals and values that we have already initiated by having these GLOs.
So would the appendix be twice as long, or if they
Would
have
be
to
the
decide
same,
what they
yeah.
want to put in there? when
It
they're
depends
writing
upon
down?
them. You will, I am sure, I can promise you with 100% certainty that some of your students will put in every single thing you ask them to write. And some of your students will put one thing and it will be loaded with curse words. And those are all valid decisions. Maybe not good decisions, right? But all valid decisions because it's their choice to make.
So the one major requirement is a minimum for that. You said thing number 4 is one major requirement.
Right.
But they can put 2, 3, or everything else.
Well, so in the portfolio itself, they will put those 4 things. They'll put the reflection, the appendix of evidence, the first essay, or the DSP essay, and then the last major assignment. In the appendix of evidence, they can put
That's what you're
whatever they want.
Oh, okay. I thought the appendix of evidence only covered what was in the portfolio.
No, the appendix of evidence can cover
To explain
anything.
for each one, why that's supported.
Okay.
The reason for having these 2, the DSP assignment and the other assignment, is to set endpoints that will allow them to talk about it as a developmental process, right? So between this and this, here's the stuff that I did. So we look at some examples of student reflections. Would that be useful? So in the packets that I gave you, I took 3 essays that were written, these were written in class by my students. The prompt is there, it's on the back of the agenda. And it is essentially the same prompt that I sent you guys as part of the assessment. Maybe a few small tweaks, but I think it's more or less the same thing. And there are 3 essays. All of them are relatively short. And I thought we could just take maybe 15 minutes to breeze through them and see. Now, here's going to be the challenge. Don't think about what's bad about them. What I want you to be able to do in each essay is to name what you think these students are doing really well.
Are we to use the scoring guide?
No, because our scoring guide is going to be is not yet created. It may be exactly the same, but we don't know yet. So that is Stretch's, and she just gave it as an example. That is not the one that we have used, not the one that I have used this semester.
Is that something you're planning to create, or that you'll be creating together?
Yeah, I'm not sure it will be, like I said, exactly this thing, but it will be something that will give you a little more guided direction when you're being asked to read other people's portfolios. And it will be something that is programmatically, for programmatic assessment, right? So not necessarily for your class. So in your tables, in your group tables, if you could generate a list of things that you came up with that you valued, what did you come up with? So as many things as you can put on the list. What are the things that you found that you value?
In each one.
In each one. Though they don't need to be specific to each one, you could just make a sort of omnibus list. Yeah, you don't need to individualize the things you value. You could just make a big list of all the things you value. So I'll have you guys all together, and you guys all together, and one of each of you, and one of each of them. And with the list that you generated, see if you can come up with a more specific list of things you value. So try and only one person said they really like this person's use of apostrophes, so maybe you jettison that one. But you all said you like their use of ellipses, so you keep that one. Try and come up with a list of no more than 5 things. All right. So thank you for doing this. It served 2 purposes. If you look at our lists, first of all, we've got team names, which I think is the greatest. The Humble Pies and team in class essay number 2. If I had to choose a winner, I'm afraid I'm going to give it to in class essay number 2. just on creativity alone. So the list over here for the humble pies is awareness of audience and tone, strong evidence and examples, ability to internalize goals, value of the writing process, and awareness of purpose. Over here we have use of examples and evidence, awareness of personal progression, unique organizational styles and voices, awareness of writing process appeals, and emphasis on critical thinking. They are, if you will notice, incredibly similar. They are also incredibly similar to the GELOs that we have set out for the course. A lot of the times it turns out that the things that we value are the things that we value, which is nice, right? The other thing that this was meant to do was to give you some sense of what you can ask your students to do as they're putting together their evidence. What's it called? Their appendix. Their appendix of evidence. Right? You are asking your students to think about what it is that they value, what it is that they have learned to do well, and how can they take a bunch of evidence, a bunch of stuff, and whittle it down to something that is manageable enough for them to say, we like this. This helps us to demonstrate what it is that we're talking about. So you just got tricked into learning, just like my students all the time. On your agenda, you will notice that we have reserved the last 15 minutes for questions. If you have additional questions, now's the time. If you just want to throw tomatoes or vent spleen or...
I have a question about the technology and whatnot. What's the experience been in Stretch with the students doing the portfolios? How many of them have needed lots of hand-holding with the tech?
So that is a great question. It's my favorite kind of question because it's for Cindy.
So I can't account really for every single student. The students catch on to this process very quickly. Yesterday in my classroom, I had 12 kids. Okay, this is a long story, but okay, 12 kids were there. And they were helping each other before I could get there. They would raise a hand, and before I could get over there, it was them helping each other. So they know Canvas pretty well. Once you show them that, exactly what he showed, where can I find the start button on this puppy, right? And then show them a couple more buttons. Show them the URL, take them to the actual portfolio, show them how they can rename. They'll always have a welcome page. We don't need a welcome page, but you can rename the welcome page self-reflection essay. So they learn how to name a file, and then you teach them the manage organize pages, and say add page, lets them to create a new page and name it, and then you start showing them how to upload. What we're going to have to do, and we talked about this morning, is talk a little bit more about downloading and how much of that we want to get into on our reading end, because students can upload their essays in a lot of different ways. Text entry or as a file upload. If they do it as a file upload, if you have Chrome, you can preview without actually having to download, but not if you don't have Chrome. On their end, we insist that they do text upload so that we don't have to download anything, so we can just automatically get to their essays. They lose any imagery.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they would have, now, not permanent, they could upload the text, and then they would have to upload the file images separately as images and place them back in. So there's some things you'll want to play around with a little bit, and that we'll want to kind of share information about as we have various experiences with students. But we're learning as we go, and I have a little list of questions for Jennifer Red about how could we, optimize.
Firefox too?
No.
Does that work? The same
sorry?
way Chrome does Firefox?
No.
No.
I had Firefox and I couldn't get it.
Couldn't get it, okay.
So the other thing to think about, though, is that by the time they get to your class, whether it's in 1A or 1AF or 1B or 2, this incoming class will have all already done a portfolio. In order to get through the DSP, they have already done the portfolio, which is part of the reason that we are doing the same thing that the DSP is doing. So even though you may have to go through and teach them some of the things, for most of them it should be a refresher course.
Yeah, and actually I was more nervous that then my students were. I actually went to Cindy's office the day before my last day. I was like, what could go wrong? And she was like, it'll be fine. I'm like, but it won't be. And you don't know this, but I emailed Allison too. And I was like, because she's done it before, and I was like, anything you might, I was just trying to like weed out everything, like everything that could possibly go wrong. I went in the class, my students were done in like 20 minutes. And that was 20, 30 minutes max. And that was because they were also doing surveys, but just to upload the portfolio, I just had instructions, and they did it. So I actually had to not troubleshoot. And students help each other. So the ones who finished, they would help the other students, which was kind of good for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Sarah said, so we should make it a class activity, not an out-of-class activity.
It is, yeah.
I would kind of recommend, I don't know, the thing is, a student did come to class having already done it, said, I already did it. And I looked at it and he said, they're all on one, is it okay they're all on one page? So he had not created extra pages, he had just put 5 links on one page. And I went, yeah, how about if we just get rid of that page, upload it onto 5 pages, because I don't want to give anybody, throw anybody a curve. Maybe putting 5 links on one page is the way to go. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. We'll figure out as we go along what the best process is. I have seen, and I don't know if Canvas can do it, where you can swipe through a portfolio. And you can do that on Canvas when you're in a folder. So maybe that's the way you can read a folder. And there is a way to do not a URL, but a zip folder. So that maybe Jennifer ended up telling us to do with zip folders.
We'll learn that stuff.
For Div Day, will we all be together in one room or working on computers, or how do you envision it?
It would be my greatest goal to have all of us together sharing food that Richard pays for.
So that is the idea.
No, that would be my ideal. But I recognize that we are not likely to get everybody into the classroom at one time. I would love for that to happen. It's not going to happen.
It's really hard. I had somebody not be able to be here today.
Some other people are teaching at other places.
But I mean, most of us could.
I made 35 copies for today, and I've got more than half my stack left. So I think it's great. I would love for that to happen because I think as a community, as a way to build community among us, that is great. And if we can get Richard to pay for the food, even better.
So you would plan on that?
Sure, we could certainly plan it as a time for people to meet. I think it would be hard to get. We'll put Richard on twisting arms. He's the heavy.
Well, I mean, just to provide the space for...
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I would love that.
But you're working
we can
in
certainly arrange
pairs, right?
People will be matched up, yeah.
Okay. 2 or 3 or...
Probably 3.
Okay.
So that you have 2, you'll read hers, she'll read yours, and then if there's a discrepancy here, you'll have a tie break.
Solomon.
Other questions?
I mean, we were just discussing in our groups that it would probably be, would it be more helpful to have the students actually cite evidence of their writing improvement?
So this is part of the challenge of the reflection essay is that they've got 600 words as a top cap to choose from. And they have to make very careful decisions about those 600 words. Now, we could certainly ask them to do an awful lot more in order to have room to cite all the things that they want to cite, but that then means we also have to read all of those in addition, and it doesn't actually achieve the writing goal, which is you have to make really specific selections. So again, some students will choose to cite specific things, and some students will talk more generally about them.
I mean, not everything, but a couple of things just to demonstrate the...
Again, they can. Nobody is stopping them from doing that. That is one of the potential choices they
I mean, to
can.
me, for instance, essay number 2 is talking about the textual artifacts, and I have no clue what the project has.
That is...
So if I could visually see that, I could see how that person internalize the outcome and demonstrates the implementation.
That's what the appendix of evidence is for, so that they could just say SA2 and then you have access to SA2 if you want to look at it. Now, for me, because this is intended to be for an audience of people who are not just their teacher, that is a failure to recognize that they have a larger audience, right? So there are ways in which we can think about it both as a resource that you can access as a teacher, but also as a way of talking about audience for our students. So should they? Maybe. It sort of depends.
I'm still trying to picture how this will happen. What I wrote in my notes is there's a norming session, but then we grade online during the final week. Is that not true? We're like doing the grading and norming?
They have a norming session because they have a relatively small and coherent group of people who have been working together. If we can figure out a way to do a norming session, I think that that would be fantastic. The likelihood of that to me, at least at this point, and certainly as a next step, seems pretty small. So if you want me to implement some sort of requirement for you to be on campus, I can, but...
The thing I found exhausting about what we used to do, where we'd all get together and we'd grade essay after essay after essay, is that, I need breaks, and it was a lot of pressure, and I don't think we did our best work. And so the idea that we could, adapt our grading structure or whatever to our own style would be effective.
That's sort of what I think. I think there is real value to norming, like what we did today, reading through sort of all the same thing and where we get a sense of what each way of thinking is valuable, but it's not without its logistical problems.
The norming I always liked, I thought that was helpful, but we do the norming for an hour or whatever it was, and then we would go up and grade for, 5 or 6 or 7 grade hours.
I don't want to do that.
That part I don't know.
I don't want you to do that. I don't think that it is not pedagogically
I agree.
valuable.
But again, there were 2 processes, the norming and then the grading, and it seems to me if you can separate them as you've done.
Then we could do that. Okay, well, I will try and think about ways that we could have norming that will allow us to sort of, and maybe Dead Day is the day to do norming, and then grading happens after that.
That's what I thought you had said, but that's why I'm asking.
No, that's what I said, so
I see.
Yeah. That's what Stretch has been doing, but again, there are 15 of you now? 20 of you? 14, yeah. And I think there's more like 40 of us. So.
Well, it would be really great to get both programs together at the same time. Because we are all 18.
And there are some instructors who do stretching.
And we will be doing the same assessment.
We'll try and think about ways to do that. Maybe we'll do it Top Chef style, where you draw a knife and you're in the morning, you draw another knife, you're in the afternoon, something like that.